evening. I'm Brother Dr. Jeffrey Sterling, Surgeon General for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And as always, on behalf of our General President, Brother Dr. Willis Lanza III, I want to welcome you to tonight's Surgeon General Initiative webinar. This evening is a sobering topic. We'll be talking about suicide risk and prevention. And it's a sobering topic, but we hope that it's informative, and we hope that you get some takeaways that somewhere down the line may actually save a life. One thing that I just want to speak to as a prelude, particularly to our college brothers that may be listening, we understand that college brings together a lot of risk for suicide. Late adolescence and early adulthood are the periods of highest risk of developing a psychiatric disorder. The academic environment itself can be a stress-inducing environment for some. Plus, for many, college is the first time many are away from home and completely detached from their friends and their family. And even amongst those with sufficient social networks, the academic failure and any social rejection that may occur could be perceived by students as having lifelong consequences. So we understand it, we've been there, and we want to provide you with resources to help you. That being said, there perhaps is no one better to moderate this conversation for us than Deputy Surgeon General, Brother Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey, who is the Chief Medical Officer and Assistant Dean of Clinical Education at Drew University and Chief Medical Officer of the Kedron Health Systems. Welcome, Brother Dr. Bailey. Have a great show, and thank you for doing this and bringing information to our team.
Well, thank you as well, good brother, Surgeon General Jeff Sterling. I'm very happy to join the group today. We've been doing this now for a year and a half, and I think that our offerings just kind of keep getting better and better. I'm very thankful for all of the brothers that have presented thus far. I think we have some outstanding gentlemen tonight. One an Alpha brother, Brother Doss, and another perhaps a future Alpha brother, we'll see. Good friend, Dr. Chris Griffith, discussed the issue of suicide in the African American community. For me, as a 30-plus year psychiatrist, this is a area of huge saliency and importance. The reality is, in every area of medicine, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, cancer, or stroke, and for us, mental illness or brain disorders, there's often an area, a particular area within your subdiscipline that creates the most challenge and the most difficulty for the practicing clinician and doctor physician. Clearly, by definition, suicide is at the top of the list for us in American healthcare and psychiatry for the challenges that it presents, I think, both physically to the human, but also I think psychologically and emotionally and mentally, I think, and spiritually for many others as well. Today, I thought I'd share some information on the issue as we get started. And I'll let both of these gentlemen introduce themselves kind of going forward. But I do note that we've been doing this for a while, and I've been reminded that I haven't regularly given up my entire Alpha history. So I do want the group to be aware that I am a 1984 initiate into Alpha Phi Alpha at Morehouse College, Alpha Rho Chapter. And currently, proud of that. And currently, I'm also very proud to be a member here in Greater New Orleans, Louisiana, in LaPlace, Louisiana, of Omicron Psi Lambda, a brand new chapter that I'm an associate founding member. In my day work, as Brother Story points out, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm the chief of psychiatry, or the chairman of psychiatry here at LSU School of Medicine, New Orleans, and assistant dean for diversity community engagement. So issues of community engagement, I think, also address our community-based focus on all of American medicine, especially dealing with mental health. And no issues, I think, are much more important than these, as families and our family concerns all too often play a substantial role in how a person feels about themselves, whether they actually seek out and reach out and seek health care, and whether, very unfortunately, due to stigma, they don't receive the care that is often needed. With that in mind, I'm going to share a few statistics about suicide, and we're going to move on to our panel. Prevalence, third leading cause of death for African American males, ages 10 to 14, 15 to 24, and 25 to 34. And for African American females, ages 10 to 14, 15 to 24. That's data from our CDC, or our Center of Disease Control 2020 data. Between 2001 and 2017, in a 16-year period, we've experienced a 60% increase in the rate of male suicide, and a 180% increase in the rate of female suicide. So that the numbers are growing is pretty striking. That they're growing, I think, in the AA community also may challenge, I think, some of the historical considerations or the historical narrative of who, which type of individual demographically engaged in suicidal type action or behavior versus those groups that did not. I think some of the data argues against some of our preconceived notions. Next, I'd share that the potential cultural factors that considerations are relevant for our AA community and our population regarding suicide include this increased prevalence of firearms. There's a lot of firearm access. I think this group has heard me say before. I wrote a book on gun violence, and a huge discussion is the sheer amount of access to weapons and weapons of all forms of destruction, including handguns or firearm access. Firearms in the home, we know, is really a leading risk factor of suicide, published by Price in 2017. In addition, you have socioeconomic status or money or one's economic ability to manage their lives and that for their family. We know that youth are at a high risk of suicide if they feel their basic needs are not being met, published in 2004 by O'Donnell. Thirdly, racial discrimination, I think, raises its head and does have a role to play in the discussion of suicide in the African American community. We note that there's a 2.5 greater odds of experiencing suicidality in African American adults who reported experiencing racial discrimination than in those who did not, published by Ashabali in 2018. So racial discrimination and bias does play a role emotionally and psychologically in this issue regarding having suicidal thoughts and suicidal action. And finally, less access to or avoidance of medical and mental health services, access to care. Some groups use antidepressant medications less frequently, and we see that particularly in African American suicide victims compared to those who are Caucasian, where other toxic substances, not medications prescribed by psychiatrists, were used. This may indicate, we note, that African Americans are more likely to be self-medicating rather than seeking professional mental health care, which we certainly want to strongly encourage in today's overall discussion. And the final point is that there are protective factors. I'm a big fan of a prior outstanding psychiatrist, not an alpha, but a great psychiatrist in the Chicago area. Brother Doss is likely to know him. It was Carl Bell. And he liked to say throughout my career that the issue of risk factors are not predictive factors because of protective factors. And I often repeat it. We spend a lot of time in our profession discussing relative risk. And the concept is that risk factors are not predictive factors because the protective factors really speaks volumes to what we do in psychiatry, that the engagement we produce very often provides a protective manure, if you will, or cover over many individuals who may be at a higher risk of adverse outcome, even including morbidity or mortality and death. And we finally just end by saying we also do note that families matter and that family closeness regarding family composition, whether it's a single parent household or whether they're married or divorced, all of these issues can affect the level of closeness among families that can, in some settings, when it works well for a group, be a protective factor for many going forward. So those are some of my key initial comments to kind of jumpstart this conversation. I'll just briefly state we're going to start with good brother Richard Doss. Brother Doss is a psychologist in Chicago. He's been on before. I think that all my guests are great, but this is the greatest of the great. This guy he brings it each time, as I stated before. I'll let him give you an introduction of his particular work. But my experience with Dr. Doss working in the VA hospital really puts him in a catbird seat to understand how many individuals, especially Black men, may be at higher risk of considerations regarding suicide. And my first question for you today, good brother, is this issue that historically some have thought, when I was growing up in Beaumont, Texas, people thought that Blacks didn't commit suicide. And my understanding is that may not be supported by the current data. I'll give you the floor.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. And thank you, Dr. Sterling, for having me on today. Things have changed. Things have changed. A part of the truth is that suicide rates are actually underreported. So that's the first thing you need to know. That everybody who died by suicide isn't necessarily calculated in some kind of data, because one, family members don't tell people that that's how their family member died. So yeah, things are changing. I work with veterans, and veterans are at a 1.5 time rate higher and more likely to suicide than non-veterans. Data suggests that 17 to 23 veterans a day are dying by suicide. and African Americans are included in that number. There are a couple of things that contribute to veterans being more likely to suicide, and one of them is that they're, by definition, trained killers. So in boot camp and basic training, soldiers, Marines are taught to take a life. The second thing is that they also have lethal means. And so the number one source by which men suicide is firearms. So they've been trained to kill, they have weapons, and they're doing it. If we were just talking about veterans, that'd be one thing, but here's what I'm going to tell you, that the highest increase in suicide rates is not among men. And you indicated in the Journal of Pediatrics says that adolescents ages 10 to 19 or 60, and some numbers say as high as 70%. There's been a 73% increase from 1999 to 2017 among African American youth. Boys are twice as likely to suicide than girls, and Black youth are twice as likely to suicide than white youth. And then there's another number I need to throw in. You know, we won't have enough time in an hour. That for the sexual minority youth, you know, so that's going to be your gay, lesbian, and transgender youth, they're 4 times as likely to suicide as non-sexual minority youth. So the numbers are going in the wrong direction. We used to think that, like I said, we used to think that, you know, Black folks don't suicide, and then I just told you that Black youth are twice as likely to suicide as white youth. So something's wrong. There are a number of conversations that we need to have, and so I'll just open with that. But there's a lot to talk about.
Well, very good. I think that that being said, we'll segue to Dr. Griffith. Dr. Chris Griffith, a good friend of mine and a friend, I think, to the American psychiatric community. I teased him earlier. I said, although not a brother, but hopefully a brother one day. Mm-hmm. But just an outstanding psychiatrist. I've known Chris Griffith for well over a couple of decades now, in a variety of roles. As a practice psychiatrist there at in the city of Atlanta. I'll let you speak about your work at Kaiser Permanente. I know for a while you were a psychiatrist there at Georgia Tech. But I also know Chris Griffith, I think, as a national speaker on topics of psychopharmacology. As a child psychiatrist, Griffith has done quite a bit of work and spoken on issues regarding ADHD and other issues regarding these concerns in African American children. That's kind of how we initially met. And I've been very impressed then and throughout time. We've presented together at the American Psychiatric Association, maybe the National Medical Association and others. Very, very happy to have you, good Dr. Griffith. Tell us a bit about your experience and how it's there in Atlanta. And I know a lot of work you're doing there on suicide as well. Happy to have you.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Dr. Bailey, for that most kind and gracious introduction. And it's an honor to share this semi-stage with Dr. Doss. And thanks, Dr. Sterling, for hosting us. So, you know, a very sombering topic of suicide. You know, we used to joke around, I'm sure in your days, in your postdoc and fellowship, Dr. Doss, and me and Dr. Bailey in residency, we used to say, Black folks don't kill themselves, they kill other people, you know? And so you tie those things together, truly, suicide, homicide is the biggest killer of Black people. And, you know, this topic of suicide, you know, is very troubling. And and my colleagues here have highlighted a lot of the statistics about this. And we need to know statistics and data, but the most powerful statistic is the impact it has on those people that are left those brothers, those sisters, mothers, those fathers, those husbands and wives who lost that person to suicide. I have some patients who are in their 90s and their older brother committed suicide. And that loss and that death of them continues to run in the back of their mind like an app. What if I would have done this? What if I would have said that? It plays over and over again like a broken record. And it has been a topic that we have had a hard time talking about. We, as Black folks, but it's not just us, it's the medical community. Half of every person who has completed suicide had seen their doctor within the past 30 days. Many times, physicians do not ask that question for fear if they answer affirmatively, what am I going to do now? How am I going to help them? What's going to happen next? So Dr. Bailey again mentioned some protective factors. One of the protective factors is this: talking about it, having an open dialogue. Do you think that by not talking about it, it's going to make it not happen? It's the same with, talking to our sons and daughters about their sexual health and their sexual activity. Do you think by not talking to them about it is going to make them not do it? So that's how it leads into this. And my story about this, references something that Dr. Sterling talked about adolescence. And so my first encounter with suicide was a real personal story. And I barely show this video in a minute. When I was an 18-year-old and first experienced suicide.
Welcome back. Well, when news broke last week about the apparent suicide of 27-year-old Wisconsin news anchor Nina Paholke, it was yet another unfortunate high-profile reminder of the issues surrounding mental health. Depression among youth and young adults is on the rise. And according to the CDC and the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 46,000 lives were lost to suicide in 2020 alone. With September being Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, Kaiser Permanente psychiatrist Dr. Marcus Griffith shares what to do.
Doctor, thank you so much for being with us, especially as we engage in a topic that is so important. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. How can someone be an ally or an advocate in the community for those who are suffering silently?
So the first thing is to not hold this so much as taboo. Lots of people fear that if you talk about suicide, it's going to make someone attempt suicide, where it's quite the opposite. So we have to be able to find ways to have open dialogues to discuss mental and emotional health.
Doctor, what would you say if someone actually has thoughts of suicide? We're not talking about somebody that is an advocate for them or maybe a family member or friend, but somebody themselves who might be watching. What can they do to get the help they need right now?
Yes, so right now is the time to get help. So fortunately, the federal government has recently authorized a new service that's very much like the 911 calls. And so we think about all the people, thousands and perhaps millions of people have been saved by 911.
Right.
Now we have a program called 988. So someone can call 988 and the phone will be answered by a licensed counselor who will then be able to intervene and find the help that someone needs right this moment.
It's so important, and I'm so glad that they're finally doing that and getting involved to really make sure that people are getting the help they need, especially these last few years. We have seen mental health crisis happening all over our communities. So this is so important, but I want to get back to a point you made about having that conversation. It's hard to open up that dialogue. So what do you recommend for us to do?
So first and foremost, it is a public health crisis. Every 10 minutes, a person successfully commits suicide. It is the number one cause of death for persons aged 10 to 35. So one of the things is this: it's not to dismiss suicidal thinking as something that is normal. So many times parents might dismiss, oh, you know, all adolescents are suicidal. No, that is not the case. That is a warning sign. So if someone does express those thoughts, get them the help they need immediately. You can use those phone numbers. You can also call your primary care doctor to have a conversation with your doctor about getting help, medications, getting connected with counseling. But the time to act is immediately.
And doctor, I understand that you actually had an early encounter with someone who committed suicide. I'm so sorry. I cannot even imagine what that's like. How did you handle it? And what would you say to someone who's encountered a similar situation?
So in encountering that situation is this: suicide is that thing, that untold problem that you will continue to struggle with the rest of your life if someone close to you commits suicide. So I was 18 years old. My track coach committed suicide at the University of Arizona at the track.
Oh my
God. I know that moment was instrumental in me becoming a psychiatrist. And so to this day, still, no one really talks about what happened, how it happened. I know now, having gone back and talked to some people, that my coach had untreated mental illness, that he wasn't able to get the help he needed. And so that is really what this is about, is making sure that if you know someone who's talking about this, to encourage them to get help. If they won't get help, help them to go and get the help themselves.
Right. And we've talked about your coach and also others who maybe aren't expressing their need for help, or, you know, they aren't talking about it. But what about those parents that have a child that's actually spoken to them and saying, I want to harm myself, I'm not feeling myself? What do we say to them?
Do not wait. You do not get a do-over. If your child commits suicide, that child is gone forever. And so it is easier to get the help for them now, to contact your mental health center, your pediatrician, to look on the back of your insurance card, to find out who your mental health provider is and get that help that you need. And of course, you know, if someone has acute thoughts at that time, you can always call 911, you can call 988. Also, Georgia has something called GCAL, the Georgia Crisis Access Line, that someone can call that number 800-715-4225 and can get help at that moment.
Doctor, thank you so much for your advice, your expertise, especially coming from a place where you know and have experienced that type of loss. We so appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for bringing this topic to light.
Well, my brothers, as you might imagine, it's just absolutely outstanding work, timely for a lot of reasons. I think we gave the numbers earlier. I'm going to give them again now. We're going to end today with the numbers, but this National Suicide Hotline is the 1-800-273-8255, and 8255 I think represents TALK, T-A-L-K. I repeat it, is 1-800-273-8255. Great comments and timely. I want to actually come to brother Dr. Doss and have him kind of address some of those points. I think three that kind of stuck out to me that I want to hear your thoughts about, Brother Doss, are Dr. Griffin talked about taboo, and you and I already addressed a little bit about taboo issues and how that may push people away from getting care. And what your particular experience has been like as a 2-decade person there in the VA hospital or in VA hospitals doing that kind of work with that population. I think also this issue, what do we think we need to do in our community to get the word out that you should use this 988? At times there are resources that are available that in some settings, in some communities, they are not really used or not used well. And I wonder how much that actually ties to the issue of taboo. If persons, won't want to be viewed as having a mental health problem, and all too often that may lead to lack of access, lack of penetration using care, even one actually does have access. And the last point, this issue about untreated mental illness, I want you to kind of address that as well. I just clearly think that all too often in my life experience as a psychiatrist, persons may have pretty clear signs of some form of a brain disorder or a psychiatric diagnosis, but because of stigma, because of issues regarding cultural barriers, they go untreated for a long period of time until they hit a different system. The legal system will arrest you, the school system put you out of school, and other kind of settings, rather than going into a healthcare system. I've often thought that when we have a healthcare problem, all people, including Black men, need to have opportunity to pursue a healthcare solution. My three thoughts: taboo, issues regarding about 988 and using it, and then untreated mental illness. Dr. Doss.
All right. I'll start with taboo. What I hear a lot of my clients say is that I might have problems, but I'm not crazy. The idea being that if I went to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor, that I got to be crazy. And so it's something that we don't openly talk about. The idea that I might be having problems or I might be having issues. A part of the challenge as well is, while it may be a protective factor, sometimes people feel like their faith is the thing that can cure or solve, all of their problems. And while I believe that faith has a place, a very strong and important place, particularly because it gives people hope, everything can't be fixed by prayer. So Noah might have prayed, but he still needed to build a boat because the rain was going to come. So being able to talk about the fact that you have problems and that you're going through something is something that's difficult to do. I work with veterans, and the reality is that if a veteran has PTSD and is still active duty, he's ill advised to tell his command that he's having those kind of problems. He could be discharged from the military. He could have difficulties getting promoted and making rank. The same is true for police officers. The first thing that happens when a police officer says that he has PTSD is that his command wants to take his weapon. And so in the military, as well as the police force, without a weapon, how long can you remain active as a police officer or a soldier? And the answer is not long. So when is it appropriate to say to somebody that I'm having thoughts of suicide? For a lot of people, they feel like that's something that you would never say. And I've had veterans to teach other veterans, whatever you do when you go in to see your psychiatrist, do not tell your psychiatrist that you are suicidal. The thought being, if you do say that, that you'll be hospitalized. So if you don't want to go to the hospital involuntarily because of suicidal ideations, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody that you're suicidal. And so one of the things that I believe and say frequently is it's going to be hard for you to heal from something that you can't even talk about. So then the question becomes, so where do I turn? Who can I talk to? And so we flash a number up and say, there's a new number that you can call, 988, and talk to a counselor or professional who is trained to work with people who are suicidal, who have suicidal ideations or mental health issues. But the reality is, will people turn to that? I like the idea that is available. But for many people, they feel like, they have to keep their issues to themselves, so in our family, sometimes we hear this saying, what happens in this house stays in this house. And as men, and particularly as successful, Black men, we've been taught to show our strengths, not our weaknesses, and those things that make us vulnerable. So, when people ask, how are you doing? The response that most people give, most men give is, oh, I'm good. I'm good. Are you having any problems, having any issues? Again, no, I'm good. And for our adolescents, what we find is when they do have signs or symptoms of depression, let's say that they're easily agitated, that they're irritable or perhaps belligerent. Uh, so if that child is white, it's easy to say, oh wow, that child has some kind of mood disorder. Let's get that child treatment. For that African American youth, oftentimes we view that behavior as disruptive. Um, and unfortunately, disruptive behavior often leads to that child going to sometimes, juvenile detention centers, the court system, and not getting the treatment that they need. So we talk about the fact that a lot of Black families don't take their children to psychiatrists, or take their children to psychologists. Uh, a lot of people will have seen that child long before they ever see a mental health professional. Um, One of the things that the Cook County Sheriff, I'm here in Chicago, one of the things that the Cook County Sheriff said several years ago was that the legal system is the number one provider of mental health services in Cook County. And so, you'd like to believe that that's not true, um, but unfortunately, that's our reality. If you were to think about the people that you know personally, and when you were to ask yourself the question, how many people do you know right now who are in therapy for their mental health issues? And I can assure you that that number is probably pretty small. So people are walking around with untreated
mental
uh,
illness.
mental illness. The thought is, when you hear people suicided, the first thing that most people say is, man, I didn't even know that, they were sick. I didn't know that they were having problems. I didn't know that they were having issues.
Right.
And the reality is that a lot of the people who suicided, it's not that they didn't have issues, but if you haven't been to a mental health professional, a psychologist or psychiatrist, where would they have gotten a diagnosis?
Right.
So the idea, without a diagnosis, now I'm left to self-medicate. I'm left to try to figure out for myself how to fix my problems. And so sometimes, say with the veterans, self-medication might be alcohol and drugs.
Right.
Self-medication might be gambling. Self-medication might be sexual behavior. But the idea is that if I have not been diagnosed, I can't be treated.
Let me ask you about the 988.
Well, the 988, it's too new. It's too new for me to speak to, its effectiveness or efficacy, because it's a new idea. Like Dr. Griffith said, it's like the 911, but as we speak, it has yet to be tested. So I'd be interested on the next call. How many people have called that number, in a 30-day time span, in a 6-month or 1-year time span?
It makes a lot of sense that it's new. You're 100% right. I think that we've seen these kind of resources roll out in the past, and sometimes our community has not been a rapid adapter, so to speak, and kind of jumped into it. So some of the consideration, I think I mentioned this group. I'm actually on SAMHSA's National Advisory Board now, and they, among other groups, have been kind of talking about it, put a lot of effort into it. So there's a lot of energy behind how to roll it out in a way where groups will use it, especially groups that have historically not tapped into mental health services. So I think you're in a catbird seat, at a VA hospital to kind of give feedback to other docs, including myself, on what might be some strategies to kind of get the word out. Because again, this idea that it is specifically, for mental health, and because of taboo and issues regarding stigma, many have not wanted to go in that direction. If you call 911, you can say, well, it was violence, XYZ. They may get there, and then you're discussing something else. Like police complain a lot about the overuse of the 911 systems, in part what led to this. The idea that many will call 911, and it's really not a violent problem or a gun problem, is domestic, conflict or XYZ, the like, if you will. So I do think there's some value in as we talk about ways to decrease suicide for African American mental health professionals like ourselves, thinking through ways to get people to tap into resources better, and now they may be one of them. Dr. Griffith, I'd be interested in your thoughts, not only about that, but just other ways to give advice, I think, to our audience on how to find ways, I think, structurally to address what can be, what clearly is a growing problem statistically of suicide in the Black community, but also I think our use of resources and preliminary strategies that may limit the risk of early mortality due to suicide.
So I'm going to use you as an example of structurally the kinds of things that need to happen to improve this problem. So when you think about psychiatrists, especially trained physicians in mental health and brain disorders, and I think I got this stat from you years ago and did a talk. There are 100,000 or so psychiatrists in the country. Less than 5,000 are Black. So that is, less than 5%. And we know where all those folks live: Atlanta, DC, Chicago, Houston. And even if you're in those cities, good luck getting an appointment. So it brings up that point about the access to care. So I'm glad that you are at LSU running a psychiatry department, bringing in more brothers and sisters to fill our shoes, but also more importantly, helping your white colleagues and Indian colleagues to understand more about who we are and who we're about. Because it is easier to talk to somebody when they look like you, they come from your community, and they are you. And we know we cannot always do that. So our training programs have to make sure that trainees are versed in cultural competence of taking care of larger numbers of minority populations. Because as we know, in 2040, our country will be majority minority. And as well, there's only less than 5% African American psychiatrists, but there's only less than 3% Latin American psychiatrists. So it really has created this mismatch of service and need. And, professionals, we identified some of those people at greatest risk. So law enforcement and soldiers, they are at high risk. Part of it is because of their access to firearms and knowing how to use it. In our field, medical professionals, there are certain professions in medicines that are considered high risk as well. Dentists, anesthesiologists, and psychiatrists have some of the highest rates of suicide, and it has to do, again, with frequent access to medicines, pills, illegal substances, and so forth. So, the part of it is, a key is we have to truly invest in our mental health workforce. There's a terrible thing that's happening right now at this moment. We recognize there's also a gun problem. There's a mental health problem. There's a gun problem. We've had all these mass killings. Maybe in the past year, I'd say 100, 200 people maybe have died from mass killings and mass shooting. But in the past year also, there have been 200,000 people who've either died from suicide or drug overdoses. And so what many of these politicians now are saying, oh, these people have mental health problems. Yes, they do. But that is not what the vast majority of what happens with mental health. Most of these people took their own lives quietly and nobody noticed except those people who love them. And so that's also part of this thing with the stigma is we can't join these two to make the stigma even worse, because now if you're identified as having a mental illness, oh, you must are going to be a killer or a mass murderer. Then, of course, Dr. Bailey, you can also reference this. They said, oh, after these things happen, these government officials raise their arms and scream, oh, we need more mental health and blah, blah, blah. But you are responsible for it going away. Each state in this country has systematically eroded away the public and private mental health systems over the last 20 years, cutting away millions and millions of dollars, closing centers, closing hospitals, not providing adequate funding for residency programs and training. And then when something goes awry, they say, oh, we need help. You can't, this is like that train stopping, it can't stop. In reverse, you can't build this system fast enough to make it right.
It was a tremendous point. In fact, I mean, you ring a lot of bells with those comments. I've been in New Orleans now for a year and a half, and there's a judge here, SSA administration judge, Judge Zaney's his name. I mentioned his name, who's very interested in mental health. He's kind of pulled some groups together. We've had a few meetings, and eventually we were working on writing a grant as an attempt to actually meet with our federal senator on this very issue. And the point that you bring up so tangibly, I think, has been a huge consideration. There just are not enough beds and bed days of psych hospitals in Louisiana. I was here about 25, 30 years ago, and then, like with many, all of us, we were all accustomed to a 30-day stay. And we didn't think then that 30-day stays were short. We thought that some patients needed even more time than that. It's really been because, I think, of fiscal issues more than clinical issues or any empirical data that would argue that across the board, we can actually hospitalize someone with acute danger very often, stating that they're suicidal and sometimes even post actual behavior, suicidal oriented activity, and essentially discharge them probably on average very often a week and sometimes even less than that. I think you make another good point. I think the earlier comment about gun violence is so timely. I think our audience should be aware that there were 24,000 gun-related suicides in the U.S. in 2020, by far the highest number ever on record. I think I presented on one of these same talks before that our domestic violence numbers also went up, our IPV, intimate partner violence, and those numbers were highest they ever were before in 2020. So clearly, we're in 2022 now, kind of at the cusp of this curve that the pandemic time period had substantial adverse implications on us in various forms of psychiatric and psychological care, in danger and violence, I think regarding suicide, assault toward others. So I think we really have our hands full increasingly now trying to find ways to manage communities that in many regards have been under a tremendous amount of stress and difficulty for some time. And I think many of those issues, I think, are compounded now. Dr. Doss, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts regarding, you mentioned Chicago a few times earlier. Mm-hmm. And one data point that I want to make sure I mention tonight and have you respond to is do a lot of work on gun violence. I think this group knows that. The national gun violence numbers, which I've mentioned in this setting before, are 6 per 100,000 by 375 million Americans. But the reality is some communities are much worse. New Orleans gets a lot of bad attention on it. But the reality is Chicago does as well. And Chicago's numbers are 18 per 100,000, or about 3 times the national number. Many are not aware, though, in Louisiana, and increasingly you're seeing this number change over in other parts of many of these rural states. In rural areas, the numbers are also 18 per 100,000. So we don't hear as much, I think, in the national media about rural Louisiana having really some similar numbers of gun violence as a big urban area like Chicago, which just to me may seem to mean that these demographics are changing, but yet the dynamics of violence, especially gun-related violence, suicide and homicide, are changing and puts us at greater risk. And I thought about it because you made the comment that individuals that you see in the VA system have been trained legally and logistically in war to hurt or to kill, and they also often have a weapon. So by definition, the risk may be higher. What are some of the thoughts you have on how your group tries to manage what may be rationale for an increasing risk of danger and suicide in that population?
All right, let me start with something. I think the politicians in the state of Illinois feel like they've come up with the answer. They feel like they've come up with the answer related to gun issues, which would also address issues of suicidality and homicides. All right, and the answer is that they have decided to invest and build more penitentiaries. Right.
All
So
right.
the state of Illinois does not have one state-run mental health hospital. So, a minute ago, we said that, Chicago is one of the largest cities in the country, and the state of Illinois has no state-run mental health hospitals. Something's wrong with that conversation.
Absolutely.
So the answer is not to build more penitentiaries. The answer is to have this conversation. So if politicians won't have the conversation, who has the conversation? So if I talk about where Black men, so I did my final year of my doctoral program at which is equivalent to you guys' residency at Cook County Hospital, the old Cook County Hospital.
Oh, Cook County, right? All right.
Right. What I learned is that African American men, I heard somebody say earlier on this conversation that you should talk to your primary care physician about your mental health issues, and let them know if you're feeling suicidal. Well, this is what I learned at Cook County Hospital. Most Black men don't have a primary care physician. They are seen in the emergency room, right? And so the question becomes, if I don't have a primary care physician, the likelihood that I'm going to have a psychiatrist is slim to none. I'm sitting here, it's September 15th, 2022, right? What I'm about to say is crazy, but Dr. Griffith alluded to it. I'm the first African American man to ever get a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Mississippi. Right. So he said a minute ago that there are 100,000 psychiatrists and only 5% or less are African American. Often when we talk about making referrals, the question becomes, hey doc, I know you don't see people who aren't veterans. Can you make a referral to a Black psychologist or a Black psychiatrist? And Carl Bell is gone.
Right.
We are few and far between, and the ongoing joke is we're like unicorns, right? So where do you turn to get help? Who do you talk to? If legislators won't talk about it, there are not a lot of us talking about it. I don't know that we have an easy answer. I think 988 is a step in the right direction, but 988 won't fix it. How do we change the culture to take away some of the stigma?
It's a tremendous point, and I think on the issue of culture, one does think that that may be our opportunity, if not, and maybe our responsibility as Black, older, I'll say, mental health professionals. I'll speak for myself. I know you and Griffith are young guys, but I think I mentioned earlier in my introduction, Dr. Chris Griffith actually was the psychiatrist for Georgia Tech there in Atlanta for some time, maybe the largest big student university there. I'm not sure if it's larger than UGA and Athens and the like, but I know that there's also some concern about increasing rates of suicide in the college community. Dr. Griffith, I definitely like to kick that ball and put that one on your plate and hear what your thoughts are, what your experience was like in that setting. And I'll go and say it, particularly in regards to Black males, because Black males may have a very different experience, even right there in Georgia. If you go to an all, Black small school at HBCU like I did, Morehouse College, versus a large place where you may be in a very stark minority. If you get your PhD at Mississippi in Jackson, I guess it's at Oxford, like Brother Doss, or if you're at a Georgia Tech in a large city like Atlanta, but there's a small number of Black males, I think, in that city. Dr. Griffin?
So if we look at these factors of this compounding problem with emergence of mental health issues and suicide, it's multifactorial. So why has this thing exploded in the past couple of years? Again, it's the perfect storm. Okay, so you have this virus that you cough, you hug somebody, the next week they're in a ventilator, and the following week they're dead, and all these people, and a majority of them look like us, had COVID and died and had complications. Then coupled with, what we've known all along, police kill Black men, and then you have this Black man, these Black men and women on TV getting killed in front of the police, and then there's this gaslighting, like it's okay, and then there's riots, and then there's a president who fans the fuels of racism, and it's just one thing after another after another. Oh, let alone, verge of nuclear war, perhaps. So you have all these things that have all happened at one time and will make anyone want to scream. But if you're in that vulnerable place where you have moved away from your home and you're not connected to anybody anymore, especially if you aren't at an HBCU, because one thing we know about life in the HBCU, they will take care of you. But in places like Georgia Tech, Rochester Institute of Technology, we can go through all these very technical places. When you're a young brother in there and you're the only one around, looks like you are on your own. Academically, emotionally, and many times financially. And so when you don't have that support system around you, anyone to talk to, those social connectedness, because we are social beings that we respond to each other. If you don't have those things around you, you will break more easily. And so we have to increase our networks of ways to support. So when we have our young brothers who go away to a college that's not an HBCU, try to encourage them to get connected with, a Black church there, Black organizations, get involved with something in the community that connects you with help. So you can go over to the church mother's house for Sunday dinner and have home cooked meal and just sit there and just laugh and watch, Steve Harvey or something. But just something that's different that wakens your spirit in a different way. And that is what's missing. That is also the piece that we had before in our communities when we were closer and connected with each other, that was protective against suicide. So if you kind of go back and you're to look at some of our African communities where it's still a sense of community, that rate of suicide is much lower than our sense of self and our lack of connectedness to the members of our community.
This issue of connectedness is a term that certainly resonates with me. The idea that people in general, and we're talking about young people now, may not feel connected or may actually feel disconnected, certainly seems to be often a common or running theme in issues regarding self-harm, up to and including suicide. And I have some more issues and the questions we'll get to in next, but I think that there's a lot to be said in varying communities for what are the things we're doing that are losing people, losing connectedness, use that term, I think, with some young people, and losing, I think, a fair amount, I think, of the thread that historically has kind of bound communities. I think even in your last comments, Dr. Griffith, you mentioned church, that may or may not be exactly the same as it once was. I think families as well. In my own family, I recognize that a few generations ago, I have uncles and aunts that all finished the same high school with their parents and spent most of their life in the same city, let alone the same county or state. And a generation or so later, I'm from a generation where, within the same nuclear family, people all live in 4 different states, Louisiana, Georgia, Virginia, and California. So that's my life experience. I can only imagine how difficult that may be for someone who may feel that they're isolated or all alone. You mentioned a young man who may go to college and the college doesn't have those kind of supports. So we threw a plug in for organizations like an Alpha Phi Alpha that can be that source of support for some. But we've got to probably find ways to help people find other to be connected. Dr. Dawson, any thoughts or things that may be happening successfully in Chicago?
Well, let me start with this. I think about my experience going to grad school. So I went to undergrad at an HBCU. I went to Jackson State in Jackson, and as I transitioned,
Y'all just play football then now. I understand.
right. I'll be at homecoming. So as I was transitioning to Ole Miss, and the person who introduced me to Ole Miss was a Caucasian tenured professor, and this is what she said to me. She said, they are prepared to give you a full fellowship to take care of your tuition, and they're going to give you almost $20,000 a year as a stipend, right? So effectively, you really won't have anything to pay. And I tell people oftentimes when I left grad school, actually I took a pay cut. I took a pay cut. So the thing that she said is they're going to give you money, but here's what you won't have. You won't have support.
Right.
You'll be on your own. And my experience was this. It's not so much that they are racist, but here's the nature of people. We are most comfortable with people who are like us. And so in the Department of Psychology, watch this, all of the professors are Caucasian, or they were at the time. I actually just did a talk with faculty at Ole Miss, because one of their challenges is to date. Again, I'll say it's September 15th, 2022. The Department of Psychology at the University of Mississippi has never had a tenure track psychology professor. Ever.
I understand.
So something's wrong with that. Here's the other thing as we talk about connectedness. So I remember when I was growing up, we went outside, we played marbles. Anybody know about marbles?
We would throw them at people.
Right. We played marbles. We rode our bicycles, and we didn't come in until the what?
Streetlight came on.
Streetlight came on, right.
Right. But as we think about where we are today, we've lost a sense of connectedness. So people are living via Instagram and Facebook. Now, here's the problem. People and they're bullying on social media too. But the idea is that people on Facebook are sometimes they're lying by omission, and sometimes they're only telling the good things of what's going on. Life is wonderful. I just had this. I just got a promotion. Everything is great. And so if I've been following you for 5 years on Facebook, and we've never had lunch, I've never been to your house, the sense is that in current times, what we feel is that we're friends, and we're connected, and we're supporting each other. Right. When I think that's simply not true. Me keeping up with you on Facebook and liking a disliking or loving or putting a heart on something that you're going through isn't necessarily me being there for you. I tell people, if there is something that you want me to attend, you need to call me and say, "Hey, Richard, man, we having a thing over here. You want to come?" Keeping up with me is not putting a like on my Facebook page. It's calling to say, man, bro, I ain't talked to you in a while. How you doing? Right. So the conversation about how do we stay connected. And then when I am going through something, do I go to social media to get the answer? Oh, I need y'all to pray for me. I'm going through X, Y, and Z. And then, 50 people give comments on Facebook. Hang in there. Now, here is one of the things that, I want to talk a little bit about. The things that people say to somebody who's going through something. Let's say somebody who's having mental health issues, or somebody who's just downright suicidal. We say things sometimes that make no sense. Absolutely no sense. You lose your mother, and I say to you, she's in a better place. Is being dead a better place? And so the question becomes, what message am I giving you in saying that death, that great beyond, is a better place than being alive? Right? So the idea, and even as a psychologist, here's one thing that I'm very cautious about doing. I never make a promise that I can't keep. I never make a promise that I can't keep. I saw somebody with suicidal ideations today. I hadn't seen her in about 4 years. And she said, Doc, I was thinking about checking out, and a little voice in my head said, call you. Because there has been a voice in my head, and we'll call that voice depression, a voice who's been saying a lot of really negative stuff. Your kids are on drugs. She is raising, so she's in her 70s, and she's raising her, at this point, 5-year-old twin grandchildren. Her husband of about 7 years is now blind. She is in remission from cancer. She probably has 100 strands of hair on her head, is in chronic pain. She has pain in her feet, her knees, and her back. Wow. And she said to me, Doc, I don't see a way out. Now, here's the crazy thing about depression. Depression is whispering things in your ear. So watch this. Here's the scary thing. The things that depression will whisper oftentimes are true. You're hurting, you're alone, you're broke, you don't have support. And then depression will whisper in your ear and say to you, but I have a way out for you. My experience is that when people have suicidal ideations, it's not actually that they want to be dead. Nobody wants to be in the ground 6 feet under in a box with dirt on top of them. Here's what it is. People don't want to go on living if life is going to be painful, and every day is hell, and the day after today is going to be hell. Depression tells you that there's no way out. Depression comes in the room and cuts the light out and doesn't tell you where the switch is.
I think that's timely and well said. I'm thoughtful when you say that about just our experience in psychiatry. I've seen patients do all kind of things to themselves in hospitals, including hitting themselves in the head, when they're hearing voices or having, really, really bad or negativistic thoughts or paranoid ideation. The kind of things that I think lay people who don't work in psych hospitals like the three of us, might wonder what is that person doing. But you're 100% right. I think at times if you cannot tolerate the nature of that thought, telling you to hurt yourself or telling you things that are not consistent with your cultural mores or what you think is normative. I've done a lot of work in the sexual offender literature. I did that for about 8, 9, 10 years in Houston before I moved to Tennessee. And the kinds of things that persons are often, middle-aged and older men would say about thoughts that are in their heads that, then unfortunately that acted on. That's why I was seeing them, in a forensic setting, a jail or prison setting, was striking and shocking. You see people resort to different kinds of actions to try to address it. But I think time, in my experience as well, has been when you talk to persons, it is a very deep level conversation and a very intense one, as I think you point out in your comments, Brother Dr. Doss. But the reality is, by the time somebody tries to commit suicide, all too often, my experience has been similar to yours, they've gone through a lot. And they probably have already exhausted what most of us would consider normative resources and defense mechanisms to manage it. They may have drank some alcohol, they may have gone to church, they may have tried to pray, they may have tried to give it some time, they may have tried to self-medicate, all kinds of things, all too often, unfortunately, without going to professionals who this is our job, our careers to try to work with them, which is adverse, I think, in our community. But the seriousness and the gravity strikes me of how substantive these issues can be and how serious they certainly have been in many patients' lives. Dr. Griffith, any thoughts?
Let me ask this question though. Let me ask this question. If I'm a friend of that person, who's in a dark place, and as a friend, I probably wouldn't know the term suicidal ideations. I just know they're in a dark place. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to encourage them. Do I turn to them and say, hang in there, it's gonna be all right? Do I?
You do all those things, and maybe that's that place, depending on their age. You tell their mother, you call 988, you tell somebody who if they won't act, that they can act on their behalf to get them where they need to be. And so that's ties into that my final comments related to, what Dr. Bailey and Dr. Dawes talked about. They've exhausted themselves, and this is where the suicide comes in. Well, for young people, it's quite the opposite. They have not necessarily exhausted themselves. It's that same brain dynamic. Why you don't give your 16-year-old son, a S550 or a Mustang, because of that impulsive brain. He's going to speed it. He's going to wreck it. It's that impulsive brain that leads to that impulsive suicidal act. And so the impulsive brain is in part responsible why, young people have a different, phenomenology of why and how this happens. Then if you mix substances with it, then it puts fuel on the fire of that impulsivity. And that's the same thing we know with adults and grownups, is that, half of all suicides and half of all homicide, there's substance involved that makes that brain respond in a different way. That if they weren't using that, their processing, their coping skills are going to be a little different and say, I think there's a pass.
Any treatment issues or concerns that either of the two of you want to share with our audience? I'm going to get this issue of treatment on the table, recommendations. Then we're going to end with these 3 questions I'm asking each of you specifically. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to miss the opportunity, because you run short of time. We were at about 20 minutes left now to address treatment, because clearly there may be some additional strategies you tend to employ in your own professional practice, both of you, when the issue of the, as I said before, the magnitude of suicide comes into play as compared to what many might describe as garden variety clinical depression.
Treatment, of course, there's no one size fits all. It is truly dependent on the population, the age. So when you think about, for example, medication treatments, we may be more comfortable using validated medications that show improvements in mood, anxiety following the treatment of antidepressants. However, in those under the age 25, there's now a black box warning. It says the use of these medications may induce suicidal thinking. Now, my practice over those years up until that black box warning came about, I really didn't see much of that in my own clinical practice. But as a result of that warning, now primary care doctors and even psychiatrists are very leery about prescribing antidepressants in young people for fear of that and fear of potential litigation if that person then does attempt suicide. So it all depends on what age they are in terms of use of medications. We do know that therapy can be very effective, particularly DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy can be very effective. And we all know that studies also confirm the combination of medications and therapy is far superior than either alone. Now that challenge of therapy again goes back again to that question with the pandemic and the shortage of issues. I work for Kaiser Permanente, and it's about 2 months for a new appointment through our insurance. But if you call Blue Cross Blue Shield, you call Stigma, they're in the same boat. If you try to call your friend, you call somebody who you know is cash pay, they're also 2 to 3 months for a new appointment. So the system is stressed. It is stressed to no end. But
let me make this comment.
Go ahead.
I appreciate, respect, and use medications. All right. But when it comes to behavioral problems, when it comes to mental health, psychological, emotional problems, for example, medication can't make my wife come back. Right. And so here's the challenge that I think we have as physicians and psychologists. We're in an era where people want the quick fix. So I tell an elderly gentleman, sir, you don't have to use Viagra. You could actually go to the gym, work out, get your heart rate up, for 20, 30 minutes, 3-4 times a week, and you'll probably see some results in the bedroom, dealing with your erectile dysfunction. And he says, no, just go and give me the pill, right? And so not only can he get the pill from his physician, he can get it at the gas station, right? So how do we encourage people to put in the work? The stuff we're talking about, mental health issues, emotional stuff, social stuff, it's work. And there aren't any quick fixes. And so, I like what Dr. Griffith said, so yeah, give me some medication to get me to a better place. But ultimately realize that you got to put in work too. Medication alone won't fix it. Going to the psychologist alone just won't fix it. And the thing that worked for somebody else may not necessarily work for you. Right? And so one of the things I try not to do, and I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist by training, is I make a point not to minimize what they're going through, and so sometimes one of the best things, if your friend is somebody who's going through something, you don't have to have a degree to help them, sometimes people just need to talk, and you can look at a person and say, man, that sounds messed up. How you dealing with that? Right. And as I think about suicide and suicidal ideations, here's what I understand, realize, and appreciate. I don't have the power as a psychologist to take away your option of suicide. You always have that option. Watch what I do. I say, now suicide is an option, brother, but watch this. Let's see if we can't come up with some other options before you have to exercise that one, right? Because there's no coming back from that one. All right, doc, maybe you can help me out, because again, that voice of depression is always talking, some pretty negative stuff, and it's talking some negative stuff that's true. So we're in a dark room. The client or patient doesn't know where the light switch is. But as mental health professionals, what we hope is that we at least have a flashlight, and together we can find our way to that light switch.
It definitely does speak to the need to have what my mother always called early in my career a good therapeutic alliance or a working alliance. We've got to be able to talk to our patients. We've got to be able to hear from them. That does speak to access. That does speak to cultural competency. Can a patient get in to see somebody who, like in many areas of medicine, you feel comfortable with? It may be based on race or gender or geography or language and all of a variety of other variables, but that Black men all too often can't find somebody who they feel comfortable with because not enough psychiatrists and psychologists. You guys both kind of talked about that, or that we just for any number of reasons, the barriers, emotional barriers of stigma, physical barriers, money, costs, and the like. I do think though that we're making some progress. I often will comment that early in my career, it was hard to say you're a psychiatrist in many Black community kind of events. And now when a big church has a health fair, there's a person there, sometimes it's me, or any of you, doing depression screening right next to the person doing high blood pressure screening and, screening for, prostate cancer or colonoscopy, a case may be. So I think a lot of issues are growing. We got to kind of keep pushing the envelope. Getting more young people to go into our profession, I think, is a start, and finding ways to craft a message that's salient and important and authentic, I think, to our community means a lot. I do have these 3 questions that I want to kind of hit each one of you with, and I think we're down to 12 minutes. So I'm going to give you 1 minute each on this. That will give you a chance to kind of make your final comments. I'm going to read them all to you up front so you know what they are. And we've kind of addressed some of this before, but it's often the audience members that come in the middle and didn't hear at the very beginning. And often you want to kind of end with your strongest point. So one question basically is going to be, what may be the biggest cause of the rise in suicide in African-American youth? Second question will be, can you name some additional specific protective factors that you use when you talk to your patients, Black male patients, in this regard, healthcare issues in general, and suicide? And the third is, what can we do? We're trying to decrease suicide in the Black community. I'll let you guys decide who goes first, but those are the 3 questions, and I can repeat if you need be. A minute each.
I'll go quickly.
Jump in.
So I'll start with the third one. What can we do? And the first thing I'll say is we start having conversations. So I am the mental health chairman of my chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, Theta Mu Lambda.
Say that again. What's that chapter called? Say it again.
Theta Mu Lambda.
Oh, I understand. Okay, we understand.
Right, Theta Mu Lambda. So I am the mental health chairman, and so this Saturday we're going to have this conversation during our chapter meeting.
Nice. Good work.
So I want to say hats off to Dr. Lonzer, Dr. Sterling, and Dr. Bailey, because it's because of the Surgeon General's initiative that being the chairman of the mental health committee is a new thing because of you guys.
Right. Good.
All right. So this conversation is real. Cause of the rise in youth. That's a good question, but I think, I'll go back to something that I said a moment ago. There was a time where connectedness was different, so connectedness was us outside throwing the football. Connectedness was us at the skating rink. Connectedness was us playing marbles, whereas today we're not connected. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're texting one another. I have a good friend maybe that I've never been over their house, and so when it comes time to have conversations or talk about problems and challenges that I'm having, I really don't know where to turn. And a lot of us, we're doing. Speaking of COVID and the pandemic, we're even doing church on TV, right? So I'm thinking as I grew up. Church and the youth ministry was a real thing. Now I have to go to church on YouTube. So that's crazy. So protective factors. So having family and friends that that support you, and so, and having your faith, oftentimes I'll ask the question, what are you anchored in? What's important to you? Is there anything that you're passionate about? Anything that you're looking forward to? I mean, do you have a reason to be living? Do you have a reason to get up in the morning? And I have, clients who say, I stay in the fight. Most of my clients are Vietnam veterans. I stay in the fight because nobody would take care of my dog if I was gone. I stay in the fight because of my grandchildren. That's the reason that I stay in the fight. But the idea is, I don't care what your reason is. You got to have a reason to keep going.
Dr. G.
So those three things. Number one, I'll start about what do you do? And what you do, again, is treatment. So depression, depressed mood is a generic symptom, just as a cough is a generic symptom. So that cough could be, Lord forbid, COVID, could be a vocal tic, it could be pneumonia, could be emphysema, could be, influenza. And so each of those conditions has a different treatment. Depression is exactly the same way. Is this major depressive disorder a true depressive episode? Is this the depressed phase of bipolar disorder? Is this person in the midst of a depressed mood in relation to this past trauma they've had of physical abuse, sexual abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder? Does this patient have depression as a result of their ongoing substance use disorder of alcohol and continuous use of marijuana, cocaine? Or finally, could this be because this person has untreated ADHD, that their loss of self-esteem came as a result of not exceeding and succeeding in various domains of life? So depending on what that nature of their depression is, determines the best modality of treatment, the best evidence-based modality of providing the best care for that individual. So treat the condition for what it is, identifying what it is. Protective factors tie into that. Making sure that, we do our best to encourage all of our people to, if you don't have a primary care doctor, to get one. Our primary care doctors need to, because they are the front lines of this, need to do more generalized screenings for depression, where they can administer very simple things such as the PHQ-9 or a Hamilton D screening inventory that their nurse can give to every single patient when they come in the office. That's one of the things that we do in our organization. Making sure that we have more access to psychiatrists and a network of people that we can talk to make sure that people in our community can get connected with people who look like them, talk like them, that live in the communities that can provide the highest quality of care. And then those are protective factors. Protective factors, again, are that social connectedness of our mind, our body, our spirit, to make sure we have all those things in that space and the interconnectedness that helps us to grow, that helps us to succeed, that helps us to survive, that helps us when we meet the Lord to have that connection. And then the cause is kind of those things. Why it's happening more now is that, again, that perfect storm of the breakdown, the connectedness, the sense of social isolation, this explosion of the social media. Every one of us has broke up with a girlfriend or got in a fight with somebody, but it was just between us. Now someone breaks up with a girlfriend, somebody puts it on blast and blows it up, and the whole world knows, and everybody's laughing at you, like the Teddy Pendergrass song, "Horror Wars laughing at me," but really the whole world could be laughing at them. And then you have all this manipulation of people's pictures and things that makes them just in this shame, and once that thing's there, you can't get rid of it. So there's just so many things that have kind of made this perfect storm of just a mental health and emotional crisis. And this is all part of it, finding ways to talk about it openly, having honest discussions, and then finding ways to get help.
Gentlemen, well said. I think all the way around. I clearly think that we end with these three questions because they certainly are big ticket items, I think, for this audience and others. I think that tonight's discussion has been a remarkably timely one for several reasons. One, I clearly think people need to know the numbers. And if the numbers show that there's increasing results of suicide, active suicide throughout our country and in our community. And if there is a spike post-pandemic, I think that's essential for people to be mindful of so they can take proper precautions and engage, I think, accordingly. I think in addition, our attempt to, I think, discount the narrative when it's ineffective and harmful for a certain community is our responsibility and our challenge as clinicians and professionals. And this narrative that, as I think was discussed very well by both of you, that is clearly wrongful, that African Americans don't commit suicide or maybe don't have many of the antecedents that may lead to suicidal action or behavior, must be discounted and addressed directly. Because I've often thought throughout my career that many of these social ills and societal, ills that often befuddle African Americans, maybe because of a lack of optimized early intervention of healthcare, more teenage pregnancy, or more violence, or gun violence, or more difficulties or challenges, educationally or financially, or in housing, or other forms, I think, of education, other forms, I think, of influence in American society. Healthcare shouldn't be the barrier blocking persons from having a better life and moving forward and actually attaining all their goals, like every other entity or group that certainly can do so. But I think more. I think that both of you tonight really address what I call Therapeutic Alliance. We've got to be able to, as I said earlier, talk to our patients and hear their messages. I love the comments that you've made that these issues are individual and individualized, that we have to hear from that person what their particular concerns may be, what their risks may be, and in many regards, how we might be able to intervene better for them versus somebody else, which to me speaks loudly to the issue of cultural competence. And we hope that we are a culturally competent group and that we appreciate that and recognize that there are some differences that matter in optimized healthcare, especially in regards to psychiatric care and psychological care, mental health care, where in the absence of certain forms of structured laboratory, we really have to get the story to get the message right so we can make, I think, appropriate treatment decisions kind of going forward. So that being said, I will just end, as I think I have 90 seconds left, try to get on time, by thanking our General President, President Willis Lonzer, for, as I think Brother Dawes pointed out, really developing this really ingenious idea for those who are new to this show, because we have some new people each Thursday night. Alpha, like most other groups, not just fraternity, but all groups, has a healthcare committee. However, the concept of this Surgeon Joy initiative was for it to be more internal. These committees very often are externally facing. This is supposed to be very often by Alpha Brothers, for Alpha Brothers, and do so in a way that was a safe haven to discuss some issues that have historically been of challenge in many groups, especially of Black men. Over the first year, we functioned that way. We're deep into our second year now, almost finishing the second year, and we've opened it up. I think in part because the quality has been good. I thought the quality tonight of both gentlemen, Richard Doss and Chris Griffith, was just simply outstanding. And I think we also, are getting real good technical support, I think, by our overall group. And that's allowed us, I think, to brand stronger and strengthen, I think, and widen our footprint. I would certainly thank our Surgeon General, Jeffrey Sterling. I think he's done a remarkable job. He has to put this in writing so we can document very clearly the direction we're headed in. And I think that our future looks great. This is not a program geared to stop after a year or two, but hopefully have legs and continue the Surgeon Joy initiative. Finally, I want to thank the other members of the Mental Health Task Force of the SGI. I think their contributions are notable as well. So thank you very, very much. We'll end now right on time. I'm Ron Bailey, Deputy Medical Surgeon General of the Alpha Alpha Surgeon Joy Initiative. Thank Dr. Chris Griffith from Atlanta and Dr. Richard Doss from Chicago for high quality work and good discussion tonight. Hopefully things we've said will be helpful in decreasing suicide in the Black community. Thank you.